Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Robots and Red Tape. As always, I am your host, Nick Schutt. Just really want to thank everybody who's out there listening. Really appreciate you. Appreciate your engagement, and your involvement, and your support through the podcast. You are what part of what makes the show so amazing. So thank you so much. Happy to host my friend Kat Casey today. Kat, how are you?
I'm wonderful. I'm better now that we've started the chat.
Absolutely. And I love that we met at Legal Week a couple weeks ago
We
and we
did.
were drawn to each other instantly because you were wearing your beautiful, sparkly pink suit and I was wearing my purple
Purple.
three-piece suit.
Uh-huh.
And it's like, how do we not say hi at this point when we're both the best dressed people in the building? So,
I feel like we were both like, game?
mhm.
Recognized game. Yeah.
Exactly, 100%. You came with game today and I forgot to, so it's okay. I left my game upstairs.
I mean,
Um,
sparkles are my neutral. I think it's just my baseline.
Hey, listen, I love it. I love it. I love it. So, really appreciate you hopping on. And for those that don't have the opportunity to know you or haven't had the opportunity to interact with you yet, you mind telling everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got here? What's your story,
Yeah,
Kat?
yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, right now I'm the chief legal AI futurist for Masters AI, a big AI conference, and an author. I just dropped AI in legal tech, but I've had about 20 years shouting in the void about the intersection of AI and legal, and now the world seems to have caught up.
Mhm.
I've had roles from like the head of technology for Gibson Dunn, which was the number one litigation firm in the world, to building forensic programs in the Big Four, to being in the C-suite of different software companies. So I've kind of been in the musical chairs for all the different challenges people might be facing in AI. And now that the world's caught up, I'm writing, speaking, and educating about it. And I'm occasionally posting on LinkedIn, which you might see from time to time.
Absolutely, 100%. And how did you feel about Legal Week? I think it was a little different than it has been previously. First year at the Javits Center. What was your kind of thoughts of the conference overall? And do you think people talked about AI enough?
I don't I don't think they could have added those two letters into any more conversations if they tried.
Hmm.
I was talking with someone, like I've been going to Legal Week for 20 years, usually at the Hilton in Midtown, usually ending up at Faces and Names, making terrible decisions. And
Hmm.
the thing that I noticed the most is it felt like legal tech, the show, Legal Week, kind of grew up. And so for those of us that have kind of been the island of misfit toys, the cowboys that were like building the plane while it was contemplating flying in legal, I think it was almost like a bittersweet moment of, wow, we've reached the big boy table. Um, but I miss being at the kids' table a little bit. And so it was very interesting. Like it definitely beautiful venue, a lot more ability to grow and scale, a little bit of missing out on that like accidental happenstance running into someone in the Hilton lobby, but I think that'll evolve. So it's interesting. I think it was a lot of the pushback people heard was really just people being bittersweet about change and growing up, which, 20 years in, that's what the industry has to do.
Right.
Technically 39 years. I think it was like 39 years at the Hilton.
Oh, yeah, I mean, listen, I stayed at the Hilton still because I refused to change with the times this year. Maybe next year I will, but this year I refuse to. Yeah, and so yeah, I really think it's fascinating that you think about kind of AI and increased efficiency within law firms, right? I think that it's one of the things as as obviously a business owner and and a podcaster talking about AI. One of the things people always talk about is AI is going to make things more efficient, but that also means that law firms don't necessarily want to be more efficient because it's in their best interest to increase their billing. And the less efficient they are with things, the more they can bill, more hours they can bill. And so, do you think that we're watching the billable hour model break right now, or is it like how do you, having done this for so long, how do you see, this tension where we have these tools that can really increase efficiency within firms? How do you see that battle? Where do you see it as it is now, and what do you think about it?
So it's interesting. I mean, people have been writing about how the billable hour was dead since I started in the industry back in '06, probably for decades before that. But there is a perverse reverse incentive for the billable structure right now because more efficiency means you might bill less. What people are finding though is the AI efficiency is not leading to a reduction of work. It's allowing the lawyers to handle more tasks. And so their days are busier, their plates are more full. And if there's someone leveraging technology, more clients are coming to them. And so I think what you're going to find is at some point, the increased efficiency, they're going to want to capture it with maybe an alternative fee agreement that augments the billable hour. So I don't think it'll be dead as much as I always joke, ding dong, the billable's dead.
Mhm.
But I think people are going to have to reevaluate what they're incentivizing organizations that provide legal services for. And I think a lot of times that's going to be like the, higher level legal reasoning and that kind of subject matter expertise combined with institutional knowledge. And, it reminds me of, I think it was Picasso. He was doing these like speed paintings one day. He's on a stage and people were asking me, how much do you charge for this painting? It took you 5 minutes. And he was like 50 grand, 100 grand, whatever. He's like, you're not paying for my 5 minutes. You're paying for the 60 years that got me here. And so I think
Right.
there might be an evolution of you're paying for the value being provided and the outcome provided as opposed to the amount of time it took to complete X task.
Absolutely. And how do you think it's changing? I completely agree with you. I also think that like value-based billing is going to start increasing more. But I also don't necessarily want my attorneys to, hand write letters for me, right? Like that's something that it's like it's not that's not what you're not that's not what you're engaging them for, to your point. You're engaging them for how to best navigate this. How have you seen these things happen in the past,
Mhm.
right? I'm rolling out this the supply chain in this new place. Like, how do we go about that? What are the mistakes that we should, avoid making that you've seen other people make or you've made with your in-house or what have you, right? But I also think that it's going to be really interesting. And I know we were talking about this before about how it is changing the nature of legal work at the like early stage legal work, right? Because I think a lot of these lawyers have cut their teeth doing work that is now being automated away. How do you what do you think is going to happen there? And how do you see kind of the legal market changing, especially for, folks coming out of law school over the next, say, 10 years?
Well, I mean, law school is not preparing them for what they're walking into, full stop. Like, just it's not. We've had discovery and different technology involved in legal for 20 years, and there's still not courses on it. But separate and apart from that, a lot of what junior attorneys were trained on was their first couple years in a law firm. And I've talked with in-house counsel at big boy companies like, Fortune 10, and they're just saying we're not going to pay for that easily automatable type of task. And so I don't foresee the law firms going pro bono and giving free work to train their junior attorneys for these big clients.
Hmm.
But that being said, I mean, we've been having this debate on does this new technology make someone less intelligent or less capable to do something since the written word? Socrates and Plato were debating about it in, the BC times, right?
Hmm.
Um, I think what we're going to find is the skills that we value in a legal human evolve and to be more tech enabled. And so what you're going to see, I think, and I've seen at some law firms, is having requirements similar to like a pro bono requirement for AI training and upskilling in certain tasks, because what you do as a lawyer day to day is changing and the tools that you're using are changing. And so we're at an interesting inflection point. I don't think law school can bridge it. I think it's going to be more conferences. That's why I built my conferences, or on-demand legal learning, because the institutions that have not changed for 500 years are not changing in the 3 to 5 years that the entire legal industry is changing right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's really, really fascinating to see how all this stuff is kind of shaking out and we're watching things just evolve in real time. And I mean, largely like obviously the dot-com boom, but I think that this kind of exponential growth curve is happening much, much faster.
Double exponential.
Double exponential now.
Yeah, I mean, what I tell people is it took 20 years to get 100 million users of the internet, and in the year it reached 100 million, there was still like a Times article saying the internet is dead. It took
Hmm.
62 days to get 100 million users of ChatGPT, which is just one flavor of generative AI. And then at the same time, a month later, you had South Park, and Cartman talking about Gen AI, which, at first glance, it's like, oh, ha ha, a comedy's talking about it. But then it's like, oh, wait, now my mom and dad are talking about generative AI. My nephew, who's 8, is talking about generative AI. Suddenly it became ubiquitous, which meant clients were talking about it, which meant lawyers who like to avoid
Hmm.
risk, their risk calculus shifted because it was riskier not to be at least
Hmm.
looking at AI. And so everything has sort of almost become like feeding on itself in terms of the accelerated adoption, which,
Hmm.
anyone looking at past things like the dot-com boom, it can
Hmm.
kind of give you a flavor, but it's not moving fast enough to even begin to capture the moment we're in.
No, of course not. Of course not. And I mean, everybody's talking about like LLMs and agentic AI at the
Mhm.
moment, but you and I both know that that's a very, very small piece of
Yeah.
AI out there, right? That's like 5 to 10% maybe, right? And so what other, kind of AI tools have you seen out there that are being implemented, right? To actually increase efficiency and I'm sure having talked to folks that are implementing these tools across, law firms and in-house legal departments. What are you hearing that's working and what isn't?
There's been at least machine learning flavors of AI baked into legal and through case law for e-discovery, so finding evidence for at least the last 15 years.
Hmm.
And for knowledge management, kind of identifying just in unsupervised learning ways, like who has what skill set. Even with contract analytics, building a taxonomy, finding anomalous clauses, all of that really hasn't relied on generative AI. Where it gets generative is the generative search and or proactively generating either summarization or content or first pass. There's a ton of success in the machine learning. It's a little lumpier in the
Hmm.
LLM application because, you know, thinking outside the box and creativity and broadening your aperture are all kind of features, not bugs of it.
Hmm.
But there's been a whole host. I mean, e-discovery alone is a $25 billion industry that's
Yeah.
almost completely powered on AI. Same thing with contract analytics. You've got big players. I mean, literally today, Legora, who uses a bunch of different AI tools, came out with Jude Law, the
Hmm.
law as the face of their company. So there's a lot of money, a lot of success, and a lot of adoption. Where it gets funnier or murkier is, the gateway drug for a lot of legal humans is LLMs, but the
Hmm.
tools they're actually using aren't necessarily going to be large language models.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And what do you think? And what do you think are some of the keys are to successfully deploying these with like successfully, right? Deploying them within organizations, in the legal space.
I think you need cross-functional groups. So you're not operating in a silo. You need to have quantifiable, measurable pilots that are applied to discrete and limited sets. You need to be able to share those incremental wins with those kind of raving fans and then build off of them. And you need to have a methodology to evaluate the tools in your stack or the functionalities added to the tools in your stack before you're necessarily piloting with something that new. Like I think a lot of times people are like, oh, the new shiny thing, and they kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater with all the tools they have. So buildable, incremental, measurable, stackable pilots, cross-functional groups so that you're not operating in a silo. And also just really have legal at the table for the AI decisions the company is making. Because as
Mhm.
much as we're talking for the law firms, there's a lot of AI being brought into business functions, and legal increasingly is at the table. And at the floor of all that is having basic AI literacy so that
Mhm.
people can issue spot and understand kind of the blind spots, the opportunities, and the risks that are posed by these tools.
No, of course, and I would agree. I would add to that user training, right, is also workflow documentation, right? Understanding your workflows, like truthfully, what's actually happening, and then training all the people within those, and workforce retraining, and making sure that they understand how to use the tools and why they should be using them, and also how to safely use them, right? One of the things that I always teach, talk to my people about is like. All right, we're not putting any of this proprietary information into here. Like, there's a list of things you can and can't do, and I also don't think I'm not sure if people understand the cybersecurity risks associated with LLMs, like just the open ones on the internet.
Oh, you mean free where you're the product?
Right, exactly. Or even if you're paying for it, like paying for a month, like paying for some of it, right? I don't like, yeah, I don't really trust that they're actually not training on my data and my inputs, even if they say they aren't, even if it's in the terms of service. You kind of like, yeah, it's a contract, but like, I don't necessarily trust that they're not using that data or looking at that data.
There's even layers too that are specific to legal. So like there's something known as privilege for either attorney-client
Hmm.
communication or attorney work product. If you're feeding stuff that you talked about with your lawyer into an LLM, well, that might vitiate priv, which is one of your biggest protections and why people can talk about stuff with their lawyer. There's been a case recently with Hefner. So it's, you've got issues with proprietary information, with confidentiality, with whether or not your data is being used to train or not, which leads to exfiltration. You've got cybersecurity issues. And then you've got Priv. So there's a whole host of stuff, which is why I say those cross-functional teams are so important because I want legal in the room with the cyber team, in the room with procurement, in the room with the business guy who said AI fixes everything, right? And that's important for piloting, but also for business decisions around AI. And that's why it's so important. I think that the lawyers in the room have at least basic AI literacy. You can't just trust your tech guy because the issues you'll think of as a legal person, the tech guy might not even have on their radar through no fault of their own. It's just a different obligation, different, core focus.
Absolutely. I also don't think that I think that and as you look to deploy some of these things on site, right? Like I think the on-prem small language model deployments are absolutely super key, especially for security, right? At first, I think people don't understand that this is largely an extension of your data infrastructure, and if your data infrastructure is trash, like your doesn't matter how pretty your
Garbage
model
out.
is,
Yeah.
right? But also I think that people underestimate how big of a cybersecurity target giant law firms are, right? When you have, go ahead. I know.
I'm like they're just the big soft underbelly. Like if you're going through the effort to like, access the data of one company and you get that one company's information, if you could do the same thing and get access to 100 Fortune 500 companies at a law firm, which of the two would you do? I would go after the law firm, and we're seeing that all the time.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure that they're really trying not to let that out, but have there been a huge bunch of huge breaches at major law firms?
Yeah, there was I won't say which firm, but the biggest law firm in the world
Mhm.
had one that went super viral.
Mhm.
Basically, it wasn't even just that there was exfiltration of data, it was a full denial of service across all, whatever, 40, 50 offices they had.
That's crazy.
And the risk also for law firms is not just denial of service, it's not just exfiltration of data, it's also maybe getting insight into the specific posture in a negotiation, or if you're adverse to someone, kind of having that visibility. And so law firms need to think about the data security of the tools they have in their stack, of the third parties they're working with. And I mean, data on the move is the riskiest of all. So like how are you pushing and pulling the data? I mean, that's why, from an LLM standpoint, that might be a risk vertical or you're not necessarily thinking of, and you should be.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned some of them, but like what are, but especially like today in today's day and age where, you know, the US is kind of at war, I guess, kind of right now. And so as you look at
State actors, yeah.
right? Like, I mean, state actors is just a huge, huge thing because all the like every government uses law firms, right? And yes, there's additional data privacy rules around government data, but still, like if you're in a law firm, you're able to get in there, you're able to get a whole bunch of stuff, and then
Well,
you can
and state actors aren't looking just to do stuff necessarily to the government. They might be looking to destabilize the economy or go after one of the big, financial players or oil and gas. There's a whole host of different ways that it can be beneficial. I used to work in not in a law firm, but a similar structure. And we found out that a company had spent 6 months, a state actor, just in our system looking at stuff. And, follow on 6 months, 12 months later, you could see where that information had been used in a nefarious way against clients. And so
right.
it's really the world is much smaller than it used to be. So it's especially important, especially when there's a lot of geopolitical instability and straight up warfare that not only kinetic warfare, a lot of it is cyber.
A huge amount of it's cyber, right? I know that CISA and like 6 or 7 other agencies just released an emergency broadcast last week around PLCs and OT data, right? And some specific warnings around having PLCs publicly facing on the internet and the dangers associated with that, especially in critical infrastructure spaces, which is a place near and dear to my heart, right? Where you look at like, yeah, maybe
Yeah.
you can go ahead and turn off the water someplace, maybe, or blow up a plant, but it's just using their internal chemicals and making them move in certain ways. If you like, that's terrifying as a consumer of public water, right? Like that's terrifying.
Well, and a lot of these, public utilities and like sort of organizations, what do they have? They have counsel, they have litigation, they have data coming and going with law firms. So it ends up being an unexpected threat vector.
Absolutely, 100%. I do you think that these law firms really understand the level of risk that they're carrying, and do you think they're taking it seriously enough?
So after the really big breach happened, increasingly, yes.
Okay.
Budget for cyber was much more elevated. CISOs are in every organization. So I think there's an understanding for cyber for their data, but I don't think there's an understanding of the risk being posed by all the shadow AI, right? We've all heard of shadow IT, like 60 or 70% of organizations have a massive amount of just applications and tools being accessed for company purpose without approval and oversight from their internal,
Mhm.
whatever, CISO, CIO, CTO. The AI thing has just really amplified that. And so people are feeding data into their ChatGPT or doing stuff with Cowork or stuff with Claude without people really thinking about, oh, well, I'm moving information, I'm creating a potential, foothold for a bad actor. So
Mhm.
it's expanded the threat landscape in a way that I don't know the firms have fully thought through because there's a fair number of firms that are still saying AI is verboten, right?
Mhm.
Saying it's forbidden does not mean you're not interacting with the universe that is fundamentally changed by AI. And so I think there are some that are maybe taking the wrong stance to address it, and it's creating a vulnerability.
Yeah, moratorium on the product is not, or a moratorium on the that's like firms, and I'm sure there were some that said we're just not going to adopt email.
I mean, I used to run a tech program for a very big firm that said no cloud. Then
Really?
COVID happened. And I
Hmm.
mean, this was until 2019, so I'm not talking in the olden days.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that so it's interesting. There are firms that are very tech forward. There are firms
Mhm.
that are cosplaying as very tech forward, and then there are ones that are nope. And the nope ones, I think, are the ones that possibly have the biggest risk profile.
Yeah, but have you seen the drive to go back to on-prem in some places as well
Oh,
now? And which is it's I think it's been a really interesting like everything was cloud 100% cloud for the longest time. And now there's some on-prem like some things are getting pulled back on-prem, right?
data repatriation's become a real big push. It's sort of like the always the pendulum of insource versus outsource.
Mhm.
This is, someone else's servers versus my servers. But I think with the increased, threat actors, with wanting to differentiate yourself with proprietary tech, we are seeing a push. I don't think it's going to be a perpetual swing back to everything behind the firewall, but I would be surprised if most organizations don't have a big tranche where they are repatriating the data.
They should. I mean, and I think that, and again, I think that there's some data that should live on your own servers, right? As long as you have the right people in place to manage them, right, and the
Yeah.
right talent in place to manage them. And I think that was one of the big, thing that really appealed to me about cloud is that Microsoft can hire better cloud engineers than I
That's
can,
what I
right?
tell
They can
everyone else.
afford better ones. I would hope, right? But
Well, have
but
you seen how the sausage is made in law firms? Like every dollar that goes to tech support, infrastructure, and security is a dollar not going directly to profit sharing for the partner. So it's a
Mhm.
battle. So you really don't necessarily have the same bench of talent and bench of resources. And it's not that there aren't brilliant people working at firms, but they might make 3, 4, 5, 10x as much working in private. And so what you end up seeing is a little bit of a learning gap and a lot of a resource gap for the law firms.
Yeah, absolutely. A huge investment gap as well. And I mean, I see it with folks all the time, right? Having come up in the talent space, right? You can tell me you want all these amazing things for like in a person, but like you can't afford that person, right? So these are the people you can afford. Tell me what's really important to you, and then maybe we can train and upskill and get them, but like the really good ones aren't going to stay there for long, probably.
No, no. And it's a shame, but I think it also, what is the highest function of a law firm? It's not building software. It's, keeping client data safe, yes, but also offering legal services. And so I think some are having almost an identity crisis where they're trying to build their own proprietary tech or do
Mhm.
stuff that maybe they would be better partnering for, and certainly better buying. And so I think we're going to see the next 6, 12 months of maybe a couple companies falling on their face for law firms falling on their face trying to do it themselves. And then probably a shift back to, you know, instead of the, build more of a buy and partner approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think it's like, if they properly architect their cloud environments, right, those bills are gonna come down, but like that's also like that the people that can do that and do it well are not inexpensive.
Well, and in order to build, you really, for the most part, unless you have limitless resources, you need to kind of pick your poison. Like, are you going to be an AWS shop? Are you going to be a OpenAI shop? Are you going to go all in on Grok? Someone is, right?
Mhm.
And so if there is a geopolitical thing, like what happened with Anthropic being put on was it a problematic supply chain risk after they refused to do, I think, autonomous targeting? Like if you
Yeah.
built all your infrastructure in legal on one of those tools, could be a
Mhm.
risk. Or some of them have said certain legal functions they're prohibiting their tool from offering guidance on, even with middleware. And so,
Mhm.
if you build a legal centric tool and suddenly this company or that company can't offer legal advice, have you invested millions of dollars and thousands of hours in something you need to pivot on, and can you pivot quickly enough? And so it's a really interesting time. Like I respect the companies trying to, build their own stuff and drink their own Kool-Aid, but I think there's a time risk and
Mhm.
a being tied to the wrong horse risk because I think the companies that'll do the best in legal and everywhere are the ones that can kind of, lift and replace if they have to be on a
Mhm.
different foundational model.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I know that OpenAI had a big dip in users after they said that they'll do autonomous weapon targeting, right? Which like do
I
you
mean, technically, they didn't say they would. They just said we have a caveat that could be interpreted a multitude of ways.
yeah,
Very
of
sneaky,
course.
but
Yeah.
and then immediately it
It's
was used. Yeah,
No, of
yeah.
course. I mean, it legally is, right? It's talking outside, but I'm talking out both sides of your mouth and trying to have your cake and eat it too tight. But like these people, yeah, like, frankly, I having played with AI systems a lot, right? I'm not a professional. I don't want those things running autonomous targeting for like drones and stuff, considering the hallucinations and the gaps in logic and reasoning and and the like the the memory amount of stuff you can remember. Like I don't think that that's a good idea, but hey, what do I know?
Well, and how certain are we that a state actor can't access their information when they're literally putting their source code up in accidental updates, right? So there's some interesting stuff going, and I'm all in on AI. I've been shouting about it for 20 years. Like I
Yeah.
love this stuff. I come from a family like my grandfather was working in MIT with the Turing. Like it's
Hmm.
literally my entire life's AI and tech, but if you don't see some risks, then your eyes are willfully closed. You're kind of being willfully
Right.
ignorant to it.
Hmm.
And in the legal space, I think because like we're kind of the last line before people have their life, liberty, pursuit of wealth, possibly taken or constrained. Like you need to have a higher bar, right? And obviously we have appeals and stuff, but I think, in a weird way, because I know you come from the talent side, everyone's afraid the robots are going to take their job, right? And in my mind, I think for legal and some of these other things where you're the last human before something that truly impacts someone's life, that the humans that are in legal being in the loop is a little more important. And so there's a stickiness for
Hmm.
the legal professionals who understand the tech, but can then bring their legal reasoning. Because
Right.
where people get in trouble is when they kind of outsource their judgment or when they're like, oh, the robot said it, copy, paste, go,
Right.
right?
Absolutely. I think that some of the biggest things that I see around this is that you're not gonna, the people don't understand that it's never gonna spit out a final product, right? It'll spit out a 75 to 80% of the way there with the proper information being put in and the absolute and like the right prompting, the right massaging, going back and forth. But it will spit out some good stuff eventually, right? But then you have to go through and read it with a fine-tooth comb and edit it and make it pretty and do all the things and get the M dashes out and all these other stuff that like the things that it's like, oh yeah, this is clearly.
Hypothetical parallels are currently the bane of my existence. It's not this, but
Mhm.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, right?
The challenge for legal. So if we go back and we talk about like, how are those baby lawyers learning, right? So we have these
Mhm.
baby lawyers that are getting like thrown into AI. They are like the personification of Dunning-Kruger, right? When you don't know enough to know what you don't know. And so
Mhm.
even if they're like trying to apply their reasoning and their legal mind to the output, they may not have the historical knowledge and the context to even be able to flag the issues. And so I feel badly. I feel like there needs to be kind of an evolution of how we kind of mentor and level up the junior staff because even if they're trying to do right, they just may not have that knowledge base to even flag, hey, this is good, this is bad. And so that's an interesting, I think, inflection point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, coming from the talent side, right? And looking at it from that perspective, um, you're not going to lose your job to AI, especially not right now, right? And all these firms that you see, like all these tech firms that fired everybody, they're hiring everybody back, right? And so they're
Or here's
hiring,
the bigger secret. They were going to have layoffs anyway,
of course,
right?
because they
Like,
hired so much during COVID, during the pandemic.
yeah, well, and like for there was one big massive layoff at Baker McKinsey, which is a big law firm, but it was
Hmm.
because they had a center of excellence in Ireland with 2,000 people, and they had like a 1-to-3 ratio of support to attorney when the industry was 1-to-7. Like
Hmm.
it was a long overdue restructuring, and so AI is more of a boogeyman than the reality. And then the ones that are
Right.
saying, "Oh, AI will solve everything," they're going to be like the people who fired everyone 3 years ago and then had to
Mhm.
quietly rehire them back.
Right. Right. But who you will lose your job to is somebody using AI as a function of doing their job, and somebody that's more
Mhm.
AI literate than you and understands because that does make you be able to do more things faster. Right. And
100%. Well, and even with the same tools, someone who's got like 6 months of skill under them, who is not just like AI access, but like a little bit of AI literacy, like their outputs 10 to 15% better.
Mhm.
People with AI certification training or background are getting like a 56%, according to PwC, compensation premium. And so it's not even just like lose your job. It's, hey, you might start getting the less interesting job. You might not get the promotion. You might find your clients going somewhere else. And so it really is like it's not robots take my job, but it's if you're not immediately upskilling now and trying to develop that 6 months of AI literacy, you might find a solidified gap that you can't surpass if we're a year or 2 years from now.
Mhm. Yeah, and like yeah, what at what point does like AI illiteracy become malpractice for attorneys?
It's starting to. Like I truly think it's starting to because if you look at there was one big case, the first big case about hallucinations in legal was called Avianca, right? And so there was like someone pushing a beverage cart, whacked someone, like it was a product liability or personal injury case, right? But the attorney who wrote the motion and submitted to the court, his little kid said, "Hey, this generative AI stuff is great." He watched one YouTube video, then used it to write his case full of hallucinations. And then when the judge caught it, he asked AI to tell him whether or not he hallucinated, right? What is
Hmm.
that? That's not bad AI. That's delegating your duty to supervise as a lawyer and not doing basic due diligence on what the heck you're using, right?
Hmm.
And so the gap is already starting to happen. There's been 1,100 cases where hallucinations have been baked in, and it's not bad tech, it's bad lawyering. And the sanctions are increasing, the penalties are increasing because if you're not learning and you're refusing to get that basic AI literacy, the court is, as we like to call it, going to start bench slapping you
Hmm.
and harder and harder. And
Yep.
so we're in that window where I could see there being a malpractice case in the next 6 months if there's something egregious enough.
Hmm.
Because at this point, the risk of misusing AI is known enough that every lawyer should at least have basic literacy to issue spot, to understand if there's an issue, and to know when to ask for help. And if you can't
Hmm.
do that, you're not advising your client effectively in the age of
Yeah.
AI.
Absolutely. And wasn't there a case in New York where I remember this is like 2 years ago where somebody an attorney wrote a brief using all AI and all of the supporting cases.
That's the one. Yeah, that's
That,
Avianca. So there's been 11, almost 1,200 of those type of cases
or
since that first one, right?
somebody
And
get
again,
disbarred for it though, or no?
no, he got a $5,000 sanction and had to apologize to the court. But there have been increasing levels of penalty now. I think someone had a suspension.
Hmm.
Judges are getting mad, right? And it's interesting because there have also been a couple people that, the judge claimed there was a hallucination because there was a false case in there, and the people came up were like, "No, a human error. I made the mistake myself." So like, it's
Yeah.
interesting because it's not always a tech problem; it's a
Hmm.
bad lawyering problem. But
Hmm.
I think if you're using fake cases to represent your client in court, which there was a case last month that went all the way up to the Georgia Supreme Court, by the way. Like
Hmm.
it's not just like mom and pop shop, but
Right.
if you're not doing the basic due diligence to click the link, make sure the case is real and says what you think it is, that screams malpractice to me.
I'm with you. I'm with you because, like, yeah, and I think that as you look at, I think that it's not generally not just inventing cases anymore, right? Which is,
No, no.
which is,
Misinterpreting or
yeah.
wrong region, or what's really tough is sometimes it's exactly the right interpretation, but the wrong practice of law, like a criminal
Mhm.
case, and there's a quote in there that exactly supports your product liability case. Well, different court, different
Mhm.
application, or it's a
Mhm.
different region, or I think someone like had a quote from Roe v. Wade, but it was supporting like an IP case. Like it's
Mhm.
not wrong, but it's not right in the way you'd expect.
Correct, right? And I think that I also think that that inherently says that it shows how the AI engines are getting better, right? But it also, to your point that you were making earlier about these younger lawyers, it just because it's getting better, I think that that makes it more insidious and makes the mistakes when they happen, because they're gonna happen, makes them more costly, right? That makes the cost of not checking higher because it's very easy to go see that the case doesn't exist. It's a lot harder to go and read everything and make sure it's the right interpretation and everything, right? Like
But
that's
you
a
know what I
little
would
more
say?
nuanced.
Like when you were doing the research yourself, you had to read the case. Like just
Mhm.
because the AI found it doesn't mean you can delegate your
Right.
judgment. So I think it's like, I think what the supervising attorneys need to do. So like if you're the one signing the motion, like you're the one that's going to get bench slapped. You're going to be the one sanctioned. So if you're signing it, you need to either check yourself or
Mhm.
have it be one of the steps your juniors do. Like, hey, provide me a bibliography of every case with a hyperlink confirming that you verified it did what it said it did, right?
Mhm.
So part of it's just having the right workflow because like AI can't replace your human decision. And I think some
Mhm.
of the people who just weren't, well, were being lazy or bad lawyers
Yeah.
were letting the AI replace them.
Right. Which is again, to your
Dumb.
bad law, just very dumb. It's bad. It's bad law, but it's also it's like it's bad. It's bad professional. It's not being professional, right? It's not taking care of what you do. It's not representing your client to the best of your abilities, right? It's not going
Now,
through.
I'll give a little bit of grace though. So before COVID, I was in Greece dealing with like the IEEE and the president of Greece was there. We were trying to build policy around AI. So this is pre-generative AI. And
Mhm.
someone brought in a study that was just like blew my mind. It was basically a couple hundred people. They had done, I think, sentence recommendations, and they had a red light, green light approach where the AI would say, "Hey, we recommend, don't recommend, or
Mhm.
proceed with caution, X, Y, or Z sentencing requirement." What they found is no one disagreed with the AI. There's a human conditioning to trust system outputs more than human outputs, and so
Mhm.
you almost have to start working around the human instinct to trust technology more than
Mhm.
humans. And so
Yeah.
part of it is like I'm mad at them, but it's also if we know that's a human instinct to rely more on the AI, maybe that means we need certain different audits or mechanisms in place that force the human to pressure test the output. Because
Right.
if your instinct is going to be the AI is smarter than me, which as it gets smarter, I get it. We might have to start course correcting for that human instinct. So it's not necessarily bad human, but it's bad process that didn't account for this human instinct
Right.
with lawyering.
And I mean that's fascinating, right? I mean it makes sense, but it's very, very interesting, right? And you like, but it's also like being aware of the bias, right? I had not heard that before. It's fascinating, but yeah, and understand it. Like there are we all have internal biases, right? And the more aware you are of your own biases, the better you can try to compensate for them and work around them and work through them and continue to work and operate at a high level in spite of the fact that you like lean a certain way.
Mhm.
And so understanding that is also huge and telling people, oh no, listen, you're going to be more likely to trust this thing. And you're much more likely to trust the thing, right? But like at the same time, I can have it spit out a 4-page proposal for me like that for something that's low stakes, not difficult, and then go back and refine it, read it, make sure it flows and things like in ways that it's just way easier to do than having to sit down and like that'll
100%.
take yeah, instead of writing for an hour and a half, I can have it done in 25 minutes, right?
No, I use it all the time. What I
Hmm.
have noticed that's interesting though is I almost like, especially if I've got to do like a difficult email or something, I almost no longer trust myself without having a pass with AI now. And so it's interesting. Like, have I lost not autonomy, but like trust in my unaided ability to deliver? And the
Hmm.
output's about the same. So it's not like
Right.
an existential crisis, but it is interesting how quickly the expectation that me plus AI will always be better has kind of been embedded in my brain. And it probably is. So,
Well, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the bias that you're looking at. It's also like the measure twice, cut once.
mhm.
It's the trust but verify, right? I'd
Yeah.
rather take a look at it and look at it through a neutral point of view as opposed to like not having another pass at it.
No, 100%. And it's, I think, partly because of how I use AI. It's like, of course, you want it for the blank page problem, but also what's my blind spot? What am I not thinking about? And especially if I tell it who I want to analyze something as, it's not even my blind spot is, it's, what would this recipient, what would their reaction be? And so if I'm like crafting content or if I'm, drafting an FAQ or if I'm drafting a complicated, memo or anything like that, kind of having that lens of, I'm not going to have that perspective because it's not in my brain, what would that person's reaction be? Like, I think there's value in that.
I completely agree, right? Like I can have it look at an email from like a woman's point of view. I can't do that, right? I've never done that. I mean, it can't do it as it can. I mean, it has more data points on that than I do, but like, I can't look at it from that perspective, right? I can't come at it from a cultural perspective, right? One of the things that I found really interesting is I was at an AI presentation at the French embassy a couple years ago, and so obviously, cross cultures, we communicate differently. And this woman who's French, right, was talking about going and pitching to American VCs and how she would like essentially Americanize her
Yeah.
pitch for the VCs. And it was doing a pretty good job of taking it from like the French point of view and moving it to the American. Couldn't go back the other way very well though, which is just they may have worked that bug out, but I think it was just really interesting.
Well, if you think about it, and they were pulling from many American data sources, and there's a much larger volume of US-based content versus French content, part of it's the bias of the data set, right?
Mhm.
They don't have as many data points necessarily.
No, of course, but also, culturally, yes, which I think is going to be, I think it's really interesting when you start looking at how societies are going to be represented within AI, right? There's going to
Mhm.
be places like Yeah, I mean, like I think most of Africa has very underrepresented, and probably lots of Central and South America, and more or less developed, technologically developed places in the world that have less access to technology, but also less, curated tag data sets for you to base the training of these models on. It's going to be a lot harder for those systems to get represented, right?
Well, and even representation of, say, the multiple Chinese models of data from the US or
Hmm.
US models with data from China because they're training in their own silos. It's not that they're underrepresented in aggregate across all models, but in the individual models, there's glaring gaps.
Absolutely. It's absolutely fascinating to see how this is kind of happening. And so, as we look at a lot of these smaller legal, like these legal tools that are getting spun up to like address and solve specific problems or specific issues, what do you think about those? And how do you think that they're gonna cope with, updates being pushed out by like OpenAI or Anthropic or some of these larger organizations where they're essentially able to kill a company with update.
It's interesting. When Co-work by Anthropic was pushed out, I think almost $1 trillion, 850 million or $1 billion of investment in legal tech was wiped off the board
Hmm.
because people are afraid of that ability to kind of pivot either into the legal tech space or to remove the ability for legal technology companies to service it. I
Hmm.
don't know. I tend to think, I mean, the legal industry might be a big enough entity for these players to go after, but the legal tech space is not that massive. So I
Hmm.
don't know. I don't foresee them fully removing functionality, but I could see them doing similar to what they did, which is limiting certain accredited things, which is accounting and medical and legal, from being done using even their technology under a layer of middleware. So I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm not sure they have enough time to build their own bespoke LLMs. I don't know if what they do is have a portability between them if they need to pivot. But it's interesting. I'm watching it very closely because I think there could be a ripple effect across the entire legal tech industry um, pretty easily by certainly Anthropic and OpenAI.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm inclined to agree with you, but I think that one of the things that legal has going for it is how nuanced it is, not just at the state level, right, but
Oh,
the county
100%.
level, and
The need for legal AI is undeniable. And it's
Mhm.
because the guardrails and requirements for legal data are much higher, the audit trail, the ability to preserve, all that sort of stuff. And I don't know if the juice is worth the squeeze for these big foundation models to build that in. So the need is
Mhm.
there. I just don't know if the ability to build it on top of all the foundational models will be shifting.
Yeah.
So.
Who do you think the real winners are going to be? Like, from within the legal tech space, where do you think the real winners are going to be at?
I mean, if you look at Harvey got what is it, $11 billion valuation, and Lagora just had Jude Law make a commercial for them today. Clearly, financially, that area, the kind of the case management research place, is very, very rife with opportunity. E-discovery less, so it's just a smaller industry.
Mhm.
In terms of like the net benefit, I don't think it's in industry. I think it's access to justice. The
Mhm.
ability to kind of do self-serve legal advice or be able to bring a pro se case of representing yourself has just
Mhm.
shot through the roof. And so I think that there's a whole cohort of people who maybe didn't have access because of funds or
Mhm.
whatever to legal services, suddenly at least having a foot in the door.
Mhm.
But in terms of the tech companies, I don't know. I'd imagine we're going to see a bunch of roll-ups where like Harvey and Lagora acquire a contract analytic company and some point
Mhm.
solutions, stuff that's baked into Word or I manage other document management systems, maybe Tetris in some knowledge management and a little discovery. And maybe there'll be a Franken legal tech company that is one
Mhm.
platform to rule them all. But we've been saying
Right.
that for 20 years, so I don't know.
Yeah, I'm inclined to think that like LexisNexis is probably going to be one of the major winners when you look at the sheer size of their databases, right? And how they have
The
it
Westbrook,
all
yeah.
over the world, right? Everywhere. I think that's gonna like because I think that it doesn't really because again, it doesn't really matter what you're using it for. You need that training data, right? And the fact that they have so much of it for so long from everywhere in the world, constant like that, they're to me, that's a clear winner who's
Oh,
gonna
100%.
control
Well,
the data.
I also think we're going to see a cohort of these non-lawyer owned law firms that are like AI native, or they aren't afraid to build alternative fee structures because they're not as beholden to the fiefdom of, the partner structure and the
Hmm.
pyramid that every law firm's based off of. And so what you might see is like the top 200 firms that we talk about today may not be the top 200 in 18 months.
Hmm.
Um, People have been saying that for a while, but I feel like the ubiquity and the access of AI tools across the horizontal of legal for a firm sort of has flipped the script.
Hmm. Yeah, no. And what do you think about like how do you separate like as you like obviously analyze this market and look at it a lot, right? How do you separate, folks that are really just hype as opposed to people that are actually building things?
I mean, it's not at the organizational level either. I mean, it's individuals. It's the people that are actually talking about and building on in the innovation roles. It's tough to tell. Even companies that I think are doing great stuff are weaponizing hype so much that it's hard to tell where the hype and the reality breaks down. If you were on the show floor at Legal Week, every booth said the same thing. Didn't matter what they offered.
Hmm.
So the hype has almost subsumed the legal tech industry. So it's making it hard to differentiate and to separate the wheat from the chaff. And so that's why, in my mind, it kind of goes down to the individual, the humans I know that are doing good stuff, maybe regardless of the company that they're at.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out, especially considering how, how just the requirements for AI products within the legal space is so much different than those outside in less regulated spaces, right?
Mhm.
The fact that you need to make it repeatable, right? It needs to be defensible. It needs to be an audit
Mhm.
trail, right? And repeatable is huge. It's a huge piece of it
100%. Yeah.
because if you can't, if you can't get the same result out, then
Repeatable and explainable and
Mhm.
transparent. Because the other thing is like you need non-technologists. So lawyers stopped doing STEM probably in high school or early in college because they went more liberal arts. So you've got people who don't have a STEM background that need to be able to explain how did it get to this answer? How did this piece of evidence become relevant? How was this connection made? How was this clause identified? How was this smart contract, kicker triggered? Any number of things.
Mhm.
Like there's the explainability, the transparency, and the repeatability. They're kind of this
Mhm.
trifecta in legal that's definitely on a higher plane than other industries.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some things that you're seeing that you think more people should be talking about?
Um, I mean, I think unfortunately it's the risk of self-service without understanding the tools. Like when Anthropic released Cowork, we had the Zach Shapiro guy talking about the AI-powered law firm and all this great stuff he was doing. The whole article he wrote was full of hallucinations and written by AI, but hundreds of millions of people saw that. So suddenly you have all these small and solo practitioners who think you can just self-serve and go right to Cowork and Anthropic and not use the bespoke legal tech tools. And I think that some of them are going to get burned. And so I think it's the risk and opportunity of self-serve without purpose-built tools in tech.
Mhm.
I think also the speed at which law firms need to change. We've been kicking the can around alternative fee agreements and upskilling juniors and all of that forever, but things are happening so quickly that I think we'll see some law firms bankrupted or entire 2, 3, 4 years of law students that maybe aren't able to be hired or no
Mhm.
one's getting the training they need. And all of this is happening right now. So there's an urgency that I don't think everyone is feeling. So
Mhm.
the risk of self-serve without literacy, the urgency to develop literacy now and understand how to pivot the organizational structure of
Mhm.
legal services. And maybe not getting too caught up in the hype. As much as I think it's kind of badass that Lagora has Jude Law making
Mhm.
a commercial, how does that help people get legal services? The same thing with what's his name? The Harvey Specter guy from Suits was representing
Right.
Harvey. Awesome, very cool, but how does
Mhm.
that move the bottom line? And does that mean that the hype is kind of leaning too far into hype and not so much into practical reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always going to be part of that, and I love that. And I think that there's going to be massive winners and massive losers coming out
Mhm.
of this. But I think I think a lot of people are getting lost in the hype around this and wanting to do everything like and because there's only so much you can do with it, right? Especially now, and like the hallucinations are like it's not great when you're like using like AI generated things in articles or in briefs and things like that. But in addition to that, right? What terrifies me is like the how the hallucinations increase exponentially and have much more effect when you start looking at agentic workflows, right? Now you have one agent hallucinating and passing that to another, to another, to another.
Yeah, and who's
How do-
validating it? Well, the agent is validating that it's not a hallucination, and we know how
Mhm.
that goes. It's Ouroboros, yeah.
Right, absolutely. And they have that master agent that coordinates all the other agents, and like it's just like, what are we doing there? And like, how do you even begin to defend against something like that when it's getting pushed so much, right?
I mean, I think that goes back to you can't outsource judgment. Like at the end of the day, a lot of what we pay lawyers for is judgment. Is it a
Mhm.
risk? Is it not? And then articulating the judgment. So if you're relying on an AI system to do that piece of it, you're outsourcing what makes you valuable, right? And I think, even if you're using a dual agentic workflow, there has to be a human in the loop to validate um, multiple steps. Like you can't just let the agent run back and forth and have like 20 different iterations and cycles it goes through. So I think we're going to realize that as powerful and wonderful as AI is, which again, I'm all in on it, that the human has to take more of a lead. It's not even human in the loop, it's human in the driver's seat. And
Mhm.
especially in things like legal. And I guess the good thing is like because legal is such a linguistic thing, we have the syntax and the precision of language that you need to effectively prompt and guide the tools. I think lawyers just need to be given the confidence that they have that skill set and it can be powerful today.
Completely agree. Is there anything else you want to add, Kat? This is awesome. It's a super
No,
fascinating
love it.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah, no.
No, I mean,
I mean, I think what I'll tell, like, what for your audience, for everyone, it's like if you're feeling debilitating imposter syndrome, welcome to the club. All I do and all I have done since I was a kid is talk about AI, and I feel like it's drinking from a fire hose, and I don't know what the hell's going on. So, like, if everyone has imposter syndrome, you don't. Don't let that be the barrier to starting getting AI literate, and don't think of it like the claims of learn to code we got 10, 15 years ago. It's not learn to code, learn to STEM. It's learn how to access what you're already uniquely great at, which is the liberal arts, it's logic, it's words and phrases for my legal friends, um, in the context of AI. So it's not starting from zero, it's just learning how to use the skills you've spent decades developing in a new context. So that would be my piece because it can feel like, oh my God, I've already missed the boat. And like we're still building the boat, it hasn't left the dock yet. Come on, there's plenty of room, whether it's read a book, go to a conference, whatever the case may be. Like there now is that inflection point, and it's turning into almost like a class war. Those that have that acumen and those that don't. And I think 5 years from now it'll be a very different scenario, and you don't want to be regretting that you didn't start your journey now.
I completely agree with you. I think that, was it the old definition of insanity, right? You're doing the same thing over and over again,
There
expecting
you go.
different results. I've always hated that phrase. I like to flip it around. It's like if you want different results tomorrow, change your actions today. So
Yeah,
it's like, yeah, I'm 1,000% with you. Like take an online class, like go out and learn something, right? Just like, be a sponge. Shit, ask the AI how to use it, right? Like, because it can
yeah.
do that, right? How do you best use this? Can you create a guide for me, right? I think there's a lot of ways you could do it.
Or find a dork. Like how there
Right.
are so many of us that are like up to our eyeballs reading about this stuff. Like make them follow them on LinkedIn, start talking with them. Like I've got a whole spider web of people. I'm like, oh, agentic stuff. I talked to this person, or hey,
Mhm.
international data privacy, cyber
Right.
stuff. I mean, it's collect your tribe
Yeah.
and just start absorbing it.
Yeah, I mean, I started a podcast to start absorbing it, right? Like that was part of it, right? It's like, oh, how am I going to learn about AI? Let's talk to a whole bunch of people that know a lot more than me and figure it out, right? And like that's absolutely part of like why I wanted to do this was to help like my own education, right? Is like now I can sit here and have more in-depth conversations about it than I ever could have 2 years ago, right? Because I started 2 years ago, right? And like I haven't been doing it for 20 years like you, but I sound like this sometimes.
You know what? The curve is so fast now. Like, because the stuff I
Mhm.
was talking about 5 years ago doesn't matter anymore. Like, it's
Right.
foundational. But, like,
Mhm.
I mean, I didn't know on November 28th, 2022, that ChatGPT was coming and then the world changed. Like, you never know.
No, absolutely. I think that it's going to continue to accelerate, right? And I think that I think that where we're going to be societally in, 15 years is going to be unrecognizable to where we are now, especially as you look at how these things are going to continue to dovetail into each other, right? But like, get on the train, let's have some fun and learn and figure it out. There's still going to be, everybody's still going to need cats, right?
They are. They are. Love it.
Awesome. But okay, this has been super fun. Anything else you'd like to add before we hop off today?
No, no, I just thank you for having me. And if anyone wants to follow me, I'm Kat Casey, TechnoCat on LinkedIn. I talk about this stuff a lot.
Absolutely. Give Kat a follow and really, really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I love your sparkly sequence, as beautiful
Oh,
as it
thank you.
was. You're very welcome. And everybody, thank you so much for listening to Robots and Red Tape. I hope you're having a wonderful day.